Good afternoon, everybody. Great to have you checking in with us here on SermonLink, and welcome to our session today. We're going to be looking at the Gospel of Luke, chapter 9, as you can see indicated here, verses 28 through 43. And this is the story of the Transfiguration of Jesus, as we call it traditionally. And the reading is a little longer than usual, so I'd like to get right back into it. And again, glad you're here with us. Let's hear the word together. Now, about 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took with him Peter and John and James and went up on the mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly they saw two men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. They appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish in Jerusalem. Now Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep, but since they had stayed awake, they saw his glory and the two men who stood with him. Just as they were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah," not knowing what he said. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. And then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone, and they kept silent, and in those days told no one any of the things they had seen. On the next day, when they had come down from the mountain, a great crowd met him. Just then a man from the crowd shouted, "Teacher, I beg you to look at my son. He is my only child." And suddenly a spirit seizes him, and all at once he shrieks. It convulses him until he foams at the mouth. It mauls him and will scarcely leave him. "I begged your disciples to cast it out, but they could not." Jesus answered, "You faithless and perverse generation, how much longer must I be with you and bear with you? Bring your son here." While he was coming, the demon dashed him to the ground in convulsions, but Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit, healed the boy, and gave him back to his father. And all were astounded at the greatness of God. There's our reading. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that this is part of the traditional story at this time of year, just as we are on the edge of the season of Lent. And it is what we call the Transfiguration of Jesus. It is the scene up on the mountaintop where Jesus takes the disciples, and there, the Bible tells us, the appearance of Jesus is changed into this shining light, this brightness that is filled with the glory of God. It's one of those encounters in the Bible, and we see them or read about them periodically, where it seems as if the physical reality in which we live and the spiritual realm where God is full and present, how that boundary between the two sort of begins to fade away, and as some say, becomes thin. And it's in those thin places that this light and glory of God shines through. And it happens here in Jesus. Now, in the Gospel of Luke, as he tells about this event, it's important to notice that I believe Luke positions this story very deliberately between two other significant happenings. The first is the one that comes just prior to where we've read today. In fact, our reading begins now after these sayings. So what sayings are those that Jesus has just given to the disciples? And if we go back just right before our reading for today, here in chapter 9, we'll see that Jesus is talking about his crucifixion. He's talking about the events of the cross. He's talking about what it means for those who follow him to pick up their cross and journey with him in this path of discipleship. So Jesus is speaking about that sacrificial love that he embodies and offers to all through the cross. That's the setup for this scene of glory on the mountaintop. And then following this transfiguration moment of Jesus, we have the story that we've concluded with today, which is they're back in kind of regular territory, the plain earth, if you will. They're back into the routine of life, is another way to think about it. And there Jesus encounters this father whose son is held by this demon, this unclean spirit, and how Jesus confronts that counterpower and dispels it and restores the boy to health, and even as importantly as that, restores the boy to relationship with his father. I love that phrase. And then Jesus gives the boy back to his father, back to where he belongs, back to how he belongs and to whom he belongs. So on the other side of this transfiguration is this powerful healing and Jesus's authority over what we refer to often as the counterpowers, that which is against God. So I think what Luke is meaning for us to know is that our understanding of what happens on the mountain, where the glory of God is seen, connects to Jesus' teaching about the cross. And Jesus' power is the one who heals and restores love and relationship. That's it. The glory means nothing if it's not understood in the context of our lives, in the context of the teaching of discipleship that Jesus gives us. To make that even more clear, we have this scene at the top where Peter, in response to this glory that he's witnessing, wants to build some tents and capture the moment with these structures, kind of monuments, if you will, to the moment. And I think that's the gospel's way of challenging us in our own faith and life. Sometimes we want to just stay the way things are, capture the moment, freeze it in time, if you will, and allow that mountaintop moment to then be our focal point of faith, when in fact that is the thing that informs our faith as we live it out, both as disciples with the cross in our heart and in our mind, and receiving this healing, restorative power of Jesus at work in the world and in us. Just this last weekend, our United Methodist Church has had a special conference where a vote has been taken on whether our Book of Discipline, which is the manual that orders our life as the church, whether it would be less restrictive regarding those who are LGBTQ, and specifically as it relates to same-sex marriage and ordination of gays and homosexuals. And the decision of the church during that conference at this point in time is to remain as we've had it, with restrictive language about all of that. And I couldn't help but think, is this a situation where the church has wanted to kind of capture the moment and just keep things as they are? Let's build some tents around this way of thinking and just hold that forever, when Jesus, the glory that is in Christ, is actually calling us into the world to be both witness and disciples. And that the power of that is both the self-sacrificing love that we know in the cross, which we know is for all, and also then to be vehicles and agents of a healing, restorative power and peace that connects us again to each other and gives us back to one another in the way that God intends. So it just makes me reflect on the life of the church as a whole. And I have no more time yet today to really say more about it, but just to be reflective on that and what that has to say to us in our own lives when we want to keep things just as they are and kind of freeze our moment in time or hold to our attitudes and our learning as if this is all we need now going forward, when in fact this transformation of Jesus is really about the transformation of us and the ongoing way in which God is creating us more and more so that the light of Christ shines. Well, there's a lot there, and I've tried to just put that out there in kind of short bursts here today, but I hope it's prayerful for you and it gives you something to think about and maybe hold on to. And invite you to continue to journey in the faith. And thanks again for touching base and joining in with me. I'm, of course, Larry Brown. This is a ministry of Powell United Methodist Church. We're glad you were with us today, and we'll see you next time here on SermonLink. For now, bye-bye.